This evening, Monday, the 19th of September 2022, the Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association. Welcome to you all. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation as the original custodians of this land and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This evening I'm going to be talking about the foundation of the Maylands Historical Society, and I've found that information from two sources. One is my own memories of that time, which is a bit sketchy, and I just kick myself, but everybody can say, gee, I wish I did things better in the past, but at least there's something there. But better than that, the documentation that Frank Greenslade put together, documenting in fact the process that happened to establish the Maylands Historical Society, was really very, very interesting going through. And basically this evening that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be talking about that first year and how that came about. I joined the Maylands Ratepayers and Residents Association in 1988. And I remember meeting at the Maylands Autumn Centre where I met Alan Dufty. Alan Dufty happens to be in the room second from the end. Isn't that absolutely wonderful? So I met him in 1988. That's when I first saw Elmer Venville. Elmer Venville was the Mayor of the City of Stirling for a long, long time. Huge history with regard to that. At that time, and she'd been 12 years as Secretary of the Maylands Ratepayers and Residents Association before that. Tremendous history, and she's one of the people that, just quick by the way, she kept a scrapbook, and we've got that scrapbook. It's this thick, with all the newspaper articles about Elmer Venville. That's another story. I attended other ratepayers meetings at the Venville Centre when one of the major concerns was the City of Stirling's plans for the Maylands clay pits, also for the golf course area, which was actually a dump at that time. And the clay pits was just empty clay pits, very sad looking place. One of the regular attendees at those meetings was Frank Greenslade, who was advocating community consultation to guide what development should happen with the pits. Frank, with some other Maylands Ratepayers and Residents Association members who regularly attended those meetings, put forward the idea of forming a historical society. And I can remember that happening. There were people that turned up to the ratepayers regularly, the people who liked Maylands, the people who just didn't have one particular issue, some selfish issue that they wanted to beat somebody about or argue about. Those sort of people came and went. But there was this core of people who continually came, and one of them was Sonia Ford. Sonia Ford used to set up the tea and coffee at the back of the room. She did that regularly. She made it a really homey community event. She did that very regularly. So Frank, with some other members, put together or were involved, asked for invitations of interest for people who might be interested in doing that. Frank himself had been a member of the Swan Guildford Historical Society, so he had some idea how historical societies work. I remember being approached by Joe Winchell. Joe Winchell, who lived down on the Maylands Peninsula, and he had a big sign at the front of his house, "Save the Lakes, save the lakes." And that'd been there for a long, long time. But he lived in and I think that house is still there, on Peninsula Road. Behind his house, it was just clay pits. It was bushland. It was a sort of semi-farm, and he used to have people come and have a look at his swans that were breeding in his back garden on the lakes that were there. And one of those people that regularly went to visit him was Catherine Earhart, as a little girl, would go down and visit Uncle Joe in the farm there. She has great fond memories of going down there and seeing Joe and Gertie, who lived there. And it was Joe that invited me into his home to sign up to the Historical Society, because they had a bit of a drive to get numbers. I heard that the special meetings were happening in Maylands, but I didn't attend, something I now wish I'd made a great effort to do. So these things were happening in the background. I was working, I was doing other things in the background, Frank, and hearing things happening and all that sort of thing. It wasn't until I looked at these records that I actually saw what was happening. Another remembrance, John? Come to that in a moment. So, as I've been going through some of those archived documents, I found the minutes that Frank had put together and the process that took place. And this is one of the first documents that I found, talking about the first meeting of the Maylands Historical Committee. It was on the 6th of June 1992. Frank arranged a group to meet in a small room on the stage of the Maylands Library, the Maylands Hall, to discuss the formation of a historical society in Maylands. It was decided the group would be called the Maylands Historical Society Steering Committee, subject to confirmation by the Maylands Ratepayers and Residents Association. So they were actually a subgroup of that organisation, and they kept very good ties with that. In fact, the same people were involved in both organisations. So they decided that October 1992 would be the launch date. Give them a bit of a name. Frank to prepare the Articles of Association to be voted on at the inaugural meeting, and the newly started Bayswater Historical Society articles could be used as a guide. Having said that, the Bayswater Historical Society was just established the year before, so they'd already given us a bit of a guide as to what processes we would follow. So the applications were to be made to the City of Stirling, Lotteries West and local businesses for funds. Meeting venues suggested were the old Railways building, the Parcels office, maybe the Peninsula Hotel, an old house somewhere, or maybe one of the huts at the brickworks. And just while I think of it, one of those huts at the brickworks was used as a storeroom for a lot of the historical stuff that we collected, because we didn't want to be a museum, but some stuff we did collect there. And that was quite unfortunate, because years and years later, when we went there and opened it up, a lot of that stuff had rotted away. Picture of Frank in the Maylands Library. I can remember Frank purchased an old-fashioned computer, and I think it's still that same data projector, back from, this would have been quite a few years after the foundation. Having said that, I wanted to put some colour photographs in here, but there's no photographs of those first 3 or 4 years. Got no photographs at all. So I've put in photographs that I've found since. The next meeting was the 4th of July. Is that right? Yep. At the residence of Sonia Ford, who incidentally set up the tea and biscuits at the MRRA meetings each month. The meeting was attended by Frank Greenslade and Duncan Cameron. Sonia Ford, Flora Franzanelli, June Greenslade, Helen Rance, Delia Perrott and Colin Speed. And these would be names that Alan would remember. Remember Colin Speed?
I remember all of them.
Yeah, well done.
I'm the only one here, actually, who's not on.
Colin Speed was he was a greenie. He was a far left. So we had a broad church within the Historical Society. We had, probably Frank was touching on the right-hand side of that, because he's very much anti any liquor shops in Maylands. But anyhow, broad church, and they didn't always agree amongst themselves even. But anyhow, they all had the one aim. They decided that the 12th of October would be the inaugural meeting date, and they would approach the Minister for Heritage, local Member of Parliament, to officially launch the society. Frank had prepared the Articles of Association ready for any amendments. And then on the 26th of September, was the next meeting, again at Sonia's house. Now, Sonia's house, corner of, thank you, Kirkham Hill Terrace and Peninsula Road. A little Tudor-looking building. And that house now was demolished and 5 two-storey units have been put in its place right along there. And that was just Sonia's place with the back garden before. And a few more stories about that as well. Where am I to? That's right. Nan Smiley joined the group. And now Nan Smiley's name's come up since, and I've tried to do some research on that. Lisa Baker has an annual Nan Smiley lunch, and Nan Smiley had a lot to do with the labour movement in Western Australia, and she's a famous son as well. What was his first name? Jim Smiley. You would have seen him. We've got some information about him, but we've got little information about Nan Smiley. I'd like to find more. She was highly regarded, revered in fact. Her name was spoken with reverence. But me, on the out, I thought, oh yeah, okay, it's a big deal, name. It was only until now that I wished I'd got to know her, that these things happen. Anyhow, the group and future committee members were being sought. They had now 50 people signed up as members, some having made donations. Sonia Ford and Frank Greenslade, taken from the newspaper there when they were protesting against what was going to be happening with the old 7th Avenue Bridge. And that's another story as well that could make another huge talk with regard to the 7th Avenue Bridge and the development of that and what's happened. The business of the 3rd of October meeting was an apology from June Greenslade because she was in hospital. Preparation for the inaugural meeting included obtaining cutlery from the Baptist Church, use of the Bayswater Historical Society's opening procedure, examining the Constitution and using the Bayswater Historical Society and the MRA, the Maylands Ratepayers documents as a guide with regard to those constitutions, sending out a questionnaire to determine a suitable meeting time and date. So a little snippet went out to all the people. When would you like to meet? At what time would you like to meet? Get that come in, and being very democratic, and we'll talk about that in a minute, I hope. On the 10th of October, meeting, 70 copies of the Constitution were printed thanks to Andrew, Flora's son. I met him a few years ago. And Flora said to me, this is the guy that actually printed your constitutions back in 1992. Wow, thank you very much. You must have been quite young then. Welcome letters were sent, Q&A, questions and answer sheets sent out. Minister for Heritage unable to attend. So Judy Edwards will attend in his place. Name tags available at the welcome desk, 50 cents each. Supper supplied by various ladies. It was decided that the first ordinary general meeting be the history of Maylands in living memory. So already then, at that stage, even before they've incorporated themselves, they were organising what their first meeting's going to be about, tentatively anyhow. And it was always a big stress with regard to verbal histories. We need to catch people's memories of Maylands now before it's too late. 30 years later, we're saying the same thing. Also, with regard to the talks then, the history of the Maylands Peninsula from the beginning of the Swan River colony, that's the sort of thing that we want to research. Again, Frank with one of the early displays and all that sort of thing. Right, now, the big day. The inaugural meeting on the 12th of October 1992 at the Maylands Library Hall, 7:30, opened by Trish Bennett. You remember Trish Bennett. Trish Bennett. She was a really astute, intelligent lady, held together the Maylands Ratepayers and Residents Association when there were these angry people that all come because they're angry about that and angry about the other. And I'm sure she was a school teacher, or maybe she was a policewoman, I don't know. But anyhow, whatever it was, she could hold a really good meeting. Very impressive lady. Anyhow, she welcomed the distinguished guests. She welcomed Judy Edwards, who gave an inspiring address. At the end of my talk here, I found a voice recording of Judy Edwards' talk. In fact, a lot of the inaugural meeting was recorded, and there's a talk by the then Mayor of the City of Stirling as well, but the one from Judy Edwards is quite clear, and I hope to play that at the very end. Judy Edwards, what she looked like then. Now, she was, I'll talk about it later on, she was a huge supporter of the Maylands Historical Society. She had this picture on our newsletters, which went out month after month, and she contributed a fair little bit of money, gave us moral support, let people know about us. She was really there all the time for us. Jim McNamara, the Mayor, he addressed the meeting, but he was unfortunately able to assist the Society with accommodation. So his talk was that long, but at the end of it I noticed he was unable to assist the Historical Society with any accommodation. There we go. Now, the election of office bearers at that meeting: Frank, Duncan Cameron, June Greenslade, and Committee Flora. I'm just looking for Alan's name there. There it is, right there, Alan Dufty. Just quickly, I have got apologies, because I should have done that before, but I'll do it now because I'm thinking of Flora there. Flora's just sent me an email saying she can't attend, acknowledges this meeting, and also her daughter, Catherine Earhart, the Deputy Mayor. She's just come out of the hospital and she's housebound at the moment. She couldn't come here as well, so she sent an apology. So did Colin Coy. Colin Coy, I just talked to him. He reckons he's been hit by an MTT bus. Now, MTT bus, for those people that have been around a while, were buses that were around, but his mind's still thinking of buses as MTT buses. But I don't know the full story, I must hang up, but he's a bit traumatised. Something's gone wrong. He wanted to tell me the whole story, and anybody that knows Colin, he doesn't beat around the bush, he tells you the whole story. But I had to let him know that I was in a hurry. Steve Lorimer also sent an apology. Wonderful. The Constitution was voted on, and Len McKelkey, isn't it? Len McKelkey from the Royal West Australian Historical Society, is their president, spoke, also offering any assistance from the Royal West Australian Historical Society. A group photograph, again a later one, but some of the people, you can see Terry Gort there, Frank Greenslade, June Greenslade, and some of the other people, and Chris Bremmel, different people from the past there, and Vera Tolch. Who else can I see there? Whoops. Now, that's my wife in there. And this guy in the front, he was actually taking us out to see Gus Levy's Waddy Forest homes out in Woburn. We went on a tour out there to explore the heritage of the guy who built this building and what he did after he built His Majesty's Theatre. Went up to Woburn and he established bulk wheat handling and all that sort of stuff. And the Woburn and Dalwallinu people up there have got a big history about Gus Levy, and that's another story about how those connections. So where am I? Yeah, that's all right. So we've got 17th of October, the meeting. The President thanked the committee for the inaugural meeting. In monitoring the membership is now 65. It was agreed that the President attend the Maylands station study, and that was another thing. here, Maylands station study. I heard about it, but what was that all about? Well, that was Frank Greenslade doing a lot of work with the City of Stirling and organising what should be the future of the centre of Maylands. He always talked about the activity centre of the centre of Maylands with regard to the railway station, 8th Avenue, and the heritage buildings that were here then. Those heritage buildings, the Maymont development hadn't happened then. We still had a lot of old front buildings fronting the Maylands railway station, which incidentally, the front of those were saved because a lot of the work that Frank Greenslade did in making sure and monitoring when they knocked down the backs of those buildings to build that Maymont development, that in fact they were doing the right thing with regard to that, and he caught them out a few times as well. So he did a lot of work with regard to that. And that was all, the station study was in the early days of seeing what should Maylands look like in the future, so he's fully involved in that. So we looked at the 8th Avenue be subject to special heritage like zoning, like Guildford, consider affiliation with the Royals, attend the #1 Regional Council of Affiliated Societies. There was another affiliated societies called the #1 Council, which is something I just heard about, but it's become defunct since. But that was a way of affiliated societies clubbing together to help each other, and that doesn't exist anymore. The regional, that one, and then look at accommodation. Now look for accommodation for the Historical Society. The group photo, got that. Oops, sorry. Just bear with me for a second. Worthwhile reading this one with regard to that station study. Yeah. It was agreed that the President represent the Society at their special meeting on the 19th of October dealing with the Maylands station study by Antill and Associates. Members agreed that the area should maintain its historic atmosphere. Maylands 8th Avenue shopping precinct to be defined by a special zoning of council to confine future buildings to heritage style as using the town site of Guildford as an example. Buildings to be restricted to a limited height of 2 storeys, colours to blend with historic surroundings, facades must be in keeping with the heritage area, signs to be restricted within the area so as not to desecrate heritage buildings, and made to be compliant with old world style. Appropriate trees, landscaping, shrubbery to be considered. Traffic calming, cycleways, wider pavements to be incorporated. Considerations also to be given to the blind persons and feeder buses for the elderly. Wow, wasn't that ahead of his time? This is going back to 1992, and those things that he's talking about, they're still on the agenda now, particularly with regard to 8th Avenue and what might happen in the future of that. Another group meeting. This was a tour that we did down to Fremantle to look at the Dyfken, I think it was. We had a bit of an outing. We all went on the train together, went down there, had a look at, had a fish and chip lunch, and then came back again. So we've got Keith and Margaret Stone, who weren't in the other photograph, and Sonia Ford there as well, and David Traynor at the back, the tall one at the back, real stalwarts of the Historical Society. So, the October 24th meeting. Now, this was a committee meeting after the inauguration's been done. This is the first committee meeting before the first general meeting. 24th of October, Frank reported on the Maylands station study, which I just more or less read about there, attended by Judy Edwards, Phil Griffiths and Antill and Associates. Phil Griffiths, we came across him last year because he's involved with the Lyric Lane development. You've all seen in the local papers the Lyric Lane that they're going to put a multi-storey development, residential development behind it somehow, and this same chap who was involved in the station study back in 1992 is involved with the contractors who are actually looking at that development as well, so it was interesting to meet him. It was mentioned that sinking 8th Avenue under Guildford Road was impractical. At least they thought about it. The Grants Commission was approached for funds for verbal history training at a cost of $250. An application of the City of Stirling for $50 was applied for. Consideration of accommodation at the Peninsula Community and Cultural Centre was also considered. They were going to charge us $7 an hour. The Christmas event, already planning a Christmas event, 29th of October, 2:30 at a venue to be decided. And they ended up deciding on the old Central Hotel on the corner. Flora Fanzanelli did own that building at the time. The President to approach elderly residents for talks on early Maylands. The next meeting, a general meeting, the cost of tea and biscuits to be borne by the Society. So the first regular meeting of the Historical Society trying to remember if I got to that one. I can remember the first one I went to, dim history. Anyhow, that was on the Monday the 16th of November at the Old Peninsula Hotel, 7:30. And when the voting papers came in as to where they're going to hold the meetings, everybody decided to be the third Monday in the month at 7:30. And it was still the same. It was good. There was an apology from Roger Tomlins for that first meeting. Is to be held. The Christmas was to be held at Central House, followed by a walk along 8th Avenue to view the pre-war buildings. Now the station study talk by Phil Griffiths. I think I've got something on that. Quickly read through that, which is what that is. Frank was to represent the Historical Society with suggestions as to what we feel could be done with the Maylands Station and 8th Avenue. A letter was received from the City of Stirling re our application for accommodation for our meetings and the proposal Brickworks kiln project. It was felt that the details as shown in the letter could involve us in a considerable expense, which we are in no financial position to commit ourselves. Therefore, we should consider the position thoroughly before making commitment. That's with regard to accommodation. That matter is to be handled by the committee. The Treasurer's report by Sonia Ford, seconded Sally Carrier. They had $396 in the bank. The President reported that our application to the Grants Commission for $312, enabling us to have Batty Library train 20 members in oral history if the grant is approved. Application made to the City of Bayswater for an amount of $50 towards setting up our record books, stationery, etc. That application will also be made to the Lotteries Commission for funds to help purchase studio equipment for recording history. The President then introduced Mr Phil Griffiths of Constantine Griffiths Architects, who gave a very informative talk on the proposed Maylands precinct study. A large map was displayed outlining the heritage housing and building areas of historic importance in the Maylands study area. He pointed out how important it was for the Heritage Council, City of Stirling, Urban Rail, West Rail to work together to preserve the areas of great historic importance. Maylands had a great early history and it was of great importance for it to be maintained. Incentives should be made for people to bring historical homes to standard. A little bit of that's happened. And members were invited for questions and so forth. The committee meeting after the first general meeting on the 18th of November at Frank Greenslade's house, an exhibition of the Maylands Station study is to be held. The Grants Commission gave $312, which I talked about, for oral histories training, and Frank escorted Minister Ros Kelly, the Environmental Minister, around the clay pits and brickworks with a view to their preservation. And that was a big deal too for Frank to be able to do that. He didn't hesitate to tap ministers and mayors and people like that on the shoulder. And incidentally, he was Stirling's Citizen of the Year. He's got a huge amount of citizenship awards all over the place. I haven't documented those, but that would be another study with regard to how highly Frank Greenslade was held in the community. I can remember many times people said, "Frank, will you stand for council?" Well, Frank only stayed as president of this society for a very small time. He was the one to sit back. He was the mentor. He tapped other people to do stuff and he helped them in the background. Incidentally, he was actually, I regarded him, remember one of the first times I saw him talking at the ratepayers, I thought, wow, if I could be 1/4 of the man that he is, I'd be really worth something. And I thought that everybody should have a mentor, and he became like a second father to me, probably even better than my own father. And a bit of a sad history about how he died and so forth, and how I got to know him very, very well. We became very close. Frank and June. The first newsletter of the Maylands Historical Society came out 3 years after the establishment of the society, and it was pretty plain, but it gave quite a good summary. Here we go. Okay. So, Frank said that as a president, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our first newsletter, which will be distributed to members and other interested persons. The society was founded October 1992, having been sponsored by the ratepayers. Our inaugural meeting was held at the Maylands Library, all subsequent meetings held in the old Peninsula Hotel. Although we're a relatively young society, I feel we made good progress in the fields that we have established, which is principally to record and preserve the natural and built history of the city of Maylands. While most of us live in this historic district, little was done to preserve our heritage until this society was formed. I'd like to thank all our foundation and other members, the executive and all committee members, for their immense loyalty and support for the past 3 years. In particular, I thank our state and federal members of Parliament, Judy Edwards, Stephen Smith, and the untiring support in all matters and for the printing of our circulars. I also thank our principal sponsor, Carter's Real Estate, and the commercial firms Monk's Cellars, 8th Avenue Pharmacy, Peninsula Pottery, who have supported us with generous donations for advertising rights. We are indebted to Brenda McConaughey for her help in producing our monthly flyers. Membership continues to average about 100 members, with about 20 or 40 of those attending our meetings. That's right, we used to meet in the old Moontime room across there where Dome Coffees is now, and that was full. I did count one time, 30 people all jammed in that little room. So, looking back over the 3 years, we've had many speakers address our meetings on various subjects, mostly to do with our district. These have been very much appreciated, and recordings we have made of the talks will be recorded for future generations, expertly researched. In addition, we have made oral history recordings with equipment we were able to purchase with donations from the Lotteries Commission. Recently we received additional grants to subsidise commuter equipment. We are recognised as a progressive society amongst the affiliated societies of Royal Australian Historical Societies, who at the recent state conference accepted our motion to standardise on computer equipment and database so that all societies could interchange information. I might bore you with that, something called Mosaic. An absolute nightmare. Oh dear. So Frank basically listed in that first newsletter some of the achievements that they've done with regard to the application to record the history in Ferguson Street, the Albany Bell Castle building, the Maylands Peninsula Golf Course, the brick kilns, the station study, the old pear tree and gardens, the pear tree. The old pear tree had a fascination about the pear tree. Marmaduke Huttons, the end of the Maylands Peninsula where the Aboriginal interpretive area, there's a well there, and one of those old trees, about a 150-year-old pear tree, which was in a, I'm not sure if it's still surviving, but wanted to do that. The Maylands Ward zoning, worrying about that, Peninsula, Trambing House, railway station, the Bath Street jetty, and the old Peninsula Hotel with regard to the activities that that they involve themselves with the clay pits in the wetlands, the Mills pottery, some research about that. Frank found somebody, a relation, talking about, this would be 1995 probably, he found a relation of the Mills family who established it, and he talked to them. I don't know if we've got some documentation about that. The Maylands Aerodrome, oh, it's another story. The Maylands Aerodrome and the Interpretive Centre down there, and what Frank Greenslade and Terry Gaunt did to get that established, and the amount of work that was involved in getting it done, and where did the $80,000 come from, and all that kind of stuff. These guys just moved mountains to get things down there. So if you go down to the end of the Maylands Peninsula, see that aerodrome Interpretive Centre. Frank Greenslade was the driver for that. We went down to Kwinana, and about that same time I remember going with him, and he had a look at the Kwinana interpretive area for the Navy that they had down there. And he said, we should have something like that up here for the aerodrome. And 20 years later something happened. Maylands foreshore, Peninsula foreshore, and with regard to the residence down there, which is in not such good repair in those days. So that was some of the activities that they involved themselves in. That was the end of the newsletter. Our flyer, not a newsletter, but the flyer that went out telling people about our meetings came out looking like that. I'd collected mine, couldn't find any others anywhere else, that's why they've got my name and address on them. And none of them had the year on them. Everybody said, we know it's 1995 or whenever it was. Everybody should know that. You don't have to put it on the newsletter. Well, that made it sorting those newsletters horrendous. But anyhow, that's the sort of, and it's ephemeral stuff anyhow. It's basically telling people to come along, but ephemeral can become very historic as well. Our certificate of incorporation, the Maylands Historical Society incorporated, as it was then. Later on it became the Maylands Historical and Peninsula Association when we basically merged with the Peninsula Association, which was the people that saved this building. And one of the newspaper articles commemorating Frank Greenslade, Stephen Smith, Judy Edwards, Lou Magro, and Durazio. The other young man there, he's received an award as well, probably a youth award or something. Gee, that's good of me to remember those names. Oh, there they are down there anyhow. Yeah. So, that is my talk. Any questions?
Yeah,
yes?
There's quite a few of the names that you brought up, and I remember quite well. Because I grew up in Maylands in the mid-1940s, 50s, 60s. My grandmother came over from Victoria in 1902, lived down in Elizabeth Street, which is just off Peninsula Road.
It certainly is. It's blocked off now.
Pardon?
It's blocked off now.
Yes, it's blocked off. Her house was just pulled over earlier this year to make a trade with some units. They had a wood gallery in the early 1900s. You mentioned the clay pits. Now, in the 1970s, early 1970s, the people called them Greens, for sake of the name, they got in there and said they had to preserve this and preserve that. When the brickworks stopped going, they used them as rubbish pits, the clay pits. They filled up with water. We used to go down there, people that had chooks and ducks, and the ducks used to get out and go down there. We used to go down there and swim and spray nets over the ducks to catch them and bring them back home.
Oh, wow.
Maylands Aerodrome, my grandmother was great friends with Jimmy Woods'
wow.
wife, who was lived just around the corner. We used to go down, they used to have flood banks around the aerodrome, and because they used to fly, Jimmy Woods used to fly the rockets from there. But then it became the Royal Aero Society with the Tiger Moth. And as kids, we used to go down, they had flood banks around there, they had a pumping station to pump the water and flooded during the winter. We used to, this time of the year when all the wild oats grew up in the flood banks, we used to go down there with Shanghais and fire them at the tiger moths as they're coming into land. They never brought one down. Just out of reach.
That's absolutely wonderful stuff. And this is that what you're saying now is, and we have captured it, but that's a wealth of knowledge and that's what Frank was talking about way back 30 years ago, catching those kind of reminiscences, and they're infinitely valuable. So we'd like to actually grab you sometime. Any Wednesday, we can sit you down and ply you with a drink or two and get you talking about that.
And just furthermore, as I said, in the 70s, people came in and wanted to save the wetlands and all that. But a little while later, some big money came up.
Yep.
And they went by the boards, and they developed all these big flash houses out there. And, but you mentioned Alma Benville. My mother was on the Ratepayers Association with Alma Benville back in the 60s and 70s. Who was your mum? Who was your mum? Tyler was the mum. Tyler? Yeah. We've got a big family there. And you mentioned Franz and Alex.
Yes.
Now, the original parents, they had the shop.
Yes.
From the picture theatre. Picture theatre.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether that's the daughter that became a doctor.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Flora's done some talks.
Yeah.
She's talked about her life. Yeah. It's wonderful that we could capture that. As I say, she was one of the founding committee members, so she had a real interest in the history of Maylands. She sent an apology, quite a long written apology as to why she couldn't be here. Her and of course watching Catherine grow up as a young girl and then become the deputy mayor has been a great thing as well. So what I've got now, I've got a recording of Judy Edwards talking to the inaugural meeting, and I just want to play that now. We'll just see how it comes through. I'll just fiddle with the knobs and so forth. And see if I can get that going. Jimmy Woods. Famous name.
Defence Council, where one of Jimmy Woods' aircraft engines stored here 30 years back. Big writing engines that Jimmy Woods'
There's a thing on the
At the moment in Parliament, they consider me in great detail.
That's Trish Bennett talking, introducing Judy Edwards. Judy Edwards knew to go closer to the speaker, which Trish didn't know to do.
Other distinguished guests, I won't go through the list because you're so numerous. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very pleased to be here tonight for the launch of the Maylands Historical Society. For me at least, it's a short-term dream to come true, and for a lot of you I think it's a long-term dream to come true. I'm here tonight representing the Minister of Heritage, Jim Minty. Unfortunately, for the first time that any of us can remember, Parliament is actually sitting on a Monday night. I've got the leading part, but because at the moment in Parliament they consider me in great detail the areas of housing and heritage, Jim Minty obviously wasn't able to come here. He did try and change his time, but I wouldn't let him do that either. So he sends his deep, sincere apology and his offer of assistance to you down in the future. I've been asked though initially to say a few words about heritage from a state perspective. And I want to start by saying why it is that we need to preserve our heritage. Our environment, both the built environment, the natural environment, and our social environment, provides the context in which we live our lives. Our daily interactions with our environment help create us as personality, and they help create the community identities that we forge for ourselves. With the world changing so rapidly as it has throughout the last century, and also with attitudes and values changing rapidly at the same time, we need to look particularly to our physical surroundings to have an idea of where it was that we came from, where it is we are now, and where we're going. So, very much, our links with the past, as we see directly every day in our physical buildings, provides with some sort of sense in our daily lives. And in Maylands, we need to look no further than Transit and know that in this suburb we had the first farm in the college, which I think is an excellent achievement. And it's interesting also that we've got the brick kiln. And I suppose as I pondered this, until Trish made her remarks about the former hotel, I was going to make the remark that a lot of our heritage is about work. And we're not like places like Bowling, where they're seeking to preserve all their hotels. However, that falls a bit flat when you think of the old hotel over the road. But it certainly is that by preserving our heritage, we enrich our identity now, and we make sense of our lives now, and sense of our lives for the future. Because all of us have been passed heritage that's entrusted to us from our relatives, from our parents, from our grandparents, and from the relatives that came before us. And we have a very great responsibility to pass all of that heritage onto our children and to future generations. And I believe in this particular day and age, we have a great responsibility to preserve as much of that past as possible so that our children have a better future. It was very satisfying then when in 1990 the Heritage Act of Western Australia was passed and came into being. The Heritage Act itself focuses on those physical aspects, the places, the buildings and the sites that are part of our cultural heritage and cultural significance. Other aspects of our cultural heritage, such as documents, art, artefacts, objects, are preserved in places like libraries and museums. So it's very significant also that the Maylands Hall has become the library and that we're conserving documents in this very building. Heritage work in WA in the recent past and from now on will be undertaken by the WA Heritage Council, which is a 9-member body that includes 4 community representatives, representatives from the National Trust, representatives of property owners, local government and professional associations. The aim of the Heritage Council, and I think this will be reflected in the Maylands Historical Society aims as well, are 3. They are to identify and conserve places of cultural heritage significance, to facilitate development which is in harmony with our cultural heritage values, and I know that's a very topical issue in Maylands and probably something that the Historical Society would take up. And finally, to provide public awareness and knowledge of places of cultural significance and about our cultural heritage. The Heritage Council currently has 2 important functions. One is to compile a register of those places that are of cultural significance. Places are entered on the register either on the advice of the Council itself or directly through the Minister for Heritage. And in 91-92, 100 places were entered on the register. Many of these are in fact state government buildings, but the decision had been taken that the state government should take the lead and enter some of the buildings below to show that they truly believe in the heritage legislation. By having the property listed on the register, it serves 2 functions. One is that it signals it as a place of needed protection to preserve heritage in the future. But secondly, hopefully, it's a system of early warning to people who own the property that it is significant and that it does need to be protected. and that in fact the law to a large extent as well will protect it. As well as the register, the Heritage Council also has a database. Information that's gone immediately to that database is all properties in Western Australia classified by the National Trust and all sites entered in the register of the National Estate, which is compiled by the Federal Heritage Commission. And the third part of the Heritage Council's work at the moment is assisting local authorities to compile and maintain their own inventory of local places of significance. And that list must be compiled by February 1995. So I'm sure this association will seek to work with the City of Stirling in compiling that list. Of great satisfaction to me is the fact that with all this heritage mechanism, the process that it relies upon is community consultation and community review. Because obviously heritage belongs to the community, and it should be the community that identifies those places that are significant. In concluding, I want to make two more remarks. The first is to let you know that there is some money available through the Heritage Commission. They superintend various grants, and they also give out some of the federal money in this area. So I'm sure the Historical Society will take that up to the federal procedure. I can see Frank nodding. In conclusion then, I want to congratulate the Maylands Ratepayers Association for nurturing this idea of a historical society and for leading up to the launch tonight. And on behalf of the Minister for Heritage, I am very proud to launch the Maylands Historical Society and wish it a very long and very productive future. Thank you.
Yes, I was most impressed when I first heard that. She didn't miss a beat. The preparation that would have gone into that talk, if we had more talk, we could have listened to Jim McNamara as well, who spoke quite a lot longer and no less eloquently as well. So there's a lot of resources there. Again, thanks to Frank Greenslade for writing these down. This is all done on an old-fashioned typewriter, and you can see the little mistakes in it. Anybody who tries even typing now realises probably that that's not an easy task. But thanks for Frank for being a conscientious person that he was in doing that, but always thinking about what he can leave behind. And just quickly, one of the things I've learned as a mentor, Frank Greenslade's life just wasn't for his lifetime. He actually went right back to his ancestors as far as he could, and he absorbed that as part of his life. And what he's left behind is actually ensuring that Frank Greenslade is actually here in the longer term as well, in people's memory, even to the fact that that Greenslade Lane was put in place while he was still alive, and that is extremely unusual for that to happen. So, wonderful person. If it wasn't for Frank, and all the amount of work that you have to do to get it done. And if anybody could see that amount of work, then no, I don't want to go there. So, greatest of admiration. That's all, but we've got one more thing to do, which is most important, is to draw a raffle. And as I'm the speaker, I can draw the... yeah, we don't want to spill it out. Then we pull a pin. It's a pin in here. That's it. And I'll put the pin back in again. Keith Stone made this. Keith Stone, one of our stalwart members.
So what's he going to choose for your prize?
No, not me. No, oh, I see.
You're the speaker. A speaker is allowed to choose a bottle of red or white wine? Or
I'll take the chocolate.
Chocolates? Okay.
I'll take the chocolate. So they've got one to draw.
So we've got a book token for $25 from Rattle Books. They're very kind.
Shall we make that the first draw or the second draw?
Well, the person can choose whichever they
Oh,
want.
lovely. Okay.
Either a bottle of wine or there's two prizes. So
Lovely.
one will be a bottle of wine and the other one will be the book
So the person that's going to have to make that choice, Phil N. Phil, come out. And you can choose a red or a white wine.
Or a book token.
Or a book token from Rebel Books.
I'll take the book token.
Oh, well done.
You're going to buy a game?
Yeah.
Something for my grandma.
Oh, well done.
And another prize, please. Second.
Yes, why not? Good idea. Tony. Tony.
That's a red or white
A
wine.
red or a white wine, but if you don't drink, there is a chocolate there.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
I don't think the Christmas is coming up.
There we go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And all this routine was again set up by Frank. He loved routine, he loved ritual, and this is a ritual that he set up with regard to having red, whites and chocolates and all that sort of thing happening. So, thank you all very much. Must bail up Alan Duffy at the back there and ask him about some of his reminiscences, and it's wonderful to have somebody who I first met in 1988 actually here. People come and go, but Alan, you're a stalwart. Oh, Alan, you were on council.
Just for that period between Stirling and Bayswater, there were 3 people chosen to be committee. So we sat in council, but it didn't appeal to me. I mean, the meals were nice and the free wine, but committee meetings every night, it was interesting to see the process.
Yeah.
Your answer was an excellent mayor back in those days. Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you all very much.